"You can't park here, ma'am. This hangar isn't for people like you." The words sliced through the quiet space, bouncing off steel beams and the polished floor, and Monique Harrison froze for just a heartbeat before letting her calm take over. She stepped forward, her sneakers whispering against the concrete, a slim black blazer over a soft white blouse, dark jeans simple yet precise, her presence understated but magnetic. The manager, a middle-aged man with sharp lines etched into his face, folded his arms, his gaze fixed, waiting for her to stumble, to argue, to flinch. Around them, a few workers glanced up from carts and toolboxes, curious but hesitant. Monique approached the small desk near the entry, passing her ID and access card with a steady hand, letting the air carry her confidence. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly, her voice soft, measured, not demanding attention but claiming it by right. The manager sniffed and gestured vaguely toward the side, muttering something about verifying credentials, his words heavy with doubt. Monique didn't rush. She glanced at the jets lined up behind the glass, their sleek bodies gleaming in the morning sun, a fleet she owned but no one present knew that yet. A young pilot standing near one of the smaller aircraft raised a phone slightly, as if to capture something, and Monique's eyes flicked toward him, acknowledging silently, a small nod encouraging caution but understanding. The manager's smirk deepened, sensing what he thought was his advantage, a power he assumed came from uniform, position, and protocol. Monique paused just short of the barrier, her reflection mirrored on the polished metal of the jet's fuselage, her mind tracing the years that brought her here. The first small steps into aviation, the quiet negotiations, the unheralded long nights building a company that now spanned continents. Yet here, in this one hangar, she was treated like an intruder. The tension thickened as the manager called over another staff member, whispering loudly enough for her to hear, casting a judgmental glance that sought to define her place. Monique let her gaze drift over the room, the hum of equipment, the faint scent of fuel, the sunlight cutting across the concrete floor. Every detail anchored her. She didn't need to speak louder than necessary. Her calm, her poise, her history did the talking. The camera on the pilot's phone recorded, capturing the subtle shift in the air, the moment before change, the charged anticipation. Monique exhaled softly, centered, as if the hangar itself responded to her rhythm, the quiet before the storm. Her assistant's voice buzzed in her earpiece, low and precise, confirming readiness. The manager's doubts, the murmurs of the onlookers, all stood on the cusp of reversal. She allowed the pause to stretch, every second an assertion, every motion deliberate, before finally stepping fully into the light of the hangar, claiming the space with a subtle tilt of her head, a silent declaration that she was present, she belonged, and the narrative was about to flip, though no one yet knew exactly how. Monique Harrison stood with her hand resting lightly on the railing, the sunlight streaming through the hangar windows catching the subtle threads of her blazer, illuminating the quiet authority she carried without a word. The staff shifted uneasily, some pretending to check equipment, others glancing at their phones as if the moment could be captured and defined, but no one could grasp the full measure of her presence. A young mechanic who had been tightening the bolts on the landing gear paused mid-motion, phone raised to record, eyes wide with uncertainty. Monique did not move toward the desk or demand attention. She simply exhaled and let the rhythm of the hangar settle around her, each breath measured, deliberate. The manager cleared his throat, attempting to reassert control, his tone firm yet faltering. "Ma'am, you need to step aside while we verify your credentials." Monique's gaze did not waver. She let the words hang, heavy in the space, and then tilted her head slightly, a subtle gesture that commanded without force. The assistants on the other end of her earpiece had already confirmed, a low hum of coordination that would soon shift the balance entirely. Employees murmured among themselves, caught between protocol and the silent power emanating from her. One security guard shifted nervously, unsure if he should intervene, the weight of hesitation visible in the tense set of his shoulders. Monique's mind traced the journey that had brought her here. The early mornings negotiating with contractors, late nights reviewing flight logs, the careful construction of a company that spanned the country. She recalled the times she had been underestimated, dismissed for her quiet demeanor, for her measured clothing, for her calm voice, and how each experience had sharpened her resolve rather than diminished it. As the manager leaned forward, the edge in his voice attempting to fracture her composure, Monique's assistant signaled a subtle confirmation. The hangar lights blinked softly, the secure systems pinged with a quiet precision, and an unseen network of verification began to hum in the background. Monique shifted her weight slightly, just enough to acknowledge the mechanics and pilots around her, a nod so slight it could have been overlooked, yet it carried the authority of ownership. Conversations faltered, whispers ceased, and the room's energy tightened as if the air itself recognized the transition. The young pilot lowered his phone slightly, and yet the red recording light remained, capturing the subtlety of her command. Monique's calm was a foil to the manager's rising unease, and in that suspended moment, the hangar was hers. Without raising her voice or gesturing sharply, she occupied the space fully, a quiet assertion that the narrative had begun to bend toward truth. The anticipation among the staff, the subtle shifts in posture, the hesitant glances at computer screens and access panels, all of it registered in the tension that now stretched taut across the hangar. Monique's eyes scanned the line of jets, the polished surfaces reflecting the measured power she projected, the history she carried, and the certainty that in the coming minutes, every assumption held by those present would be tested against reality. The security manager stepped closer, attempting to assert his authority, his voice tight with uncertainty as he said, "We need to see identification and confirm your clearance before you proceed any further." Monique Harrison did not flinch. She reached into her handbag, pulling out a slim black tablet, its surface reflecting the overhead lights, and slid it across the desk toward him. The manager hesitated, his hand hovering for a moment as if the tablet might carry some hidden threat, unaware that every document on it had already been verified by corporate headquarters. Around the hangar, employees shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, some glancing at monitors showing incoming confirmation signals, the quiet ping of system alerts adding a new layer of tension. Monique's gaze swept over them, calm, precise, and commanding attention without a single raised voice. She remembered the years spent proving herself in boardrooms, in negotiations with international partners, and in offices where her quiet demeanor had been misread as weakness, yet each moment had fortified her resolve. The young pilot, still holding his phone, glanced at her, sensing the shift in energy, the silent declaration of control that radiated from her posture, her measured movements, the subtle weight of her presence. The manager swallowed, his confidence beginning to falter, and Monique allowed herself a brief pause, letting the room absorb the significance of the moment. Conversations died down, whispers faded, and even the hum of engines and ventilation seemed to adjust to the new order. Monique's assistant, speaking softly through the earpiece, confirmed all systems were green, the verification complete, and the hangar access fully authorized under her name. Without a word, she nodded slightly, a gesture so minimal that only a few noticed, yet it conveyed unambiguous authority. The employees realized, one by one, that the assumption of power they had relied upon was no longer valid. Monique stepped closer to the row of jets, her reflection mirrored on polished fuselages, every detail of her appearance, every subtle motion a silent reinforcement of ownership. The manager, still trying to assert control, shifted uneasily, and the technicians and staff exchanged glances, uncertainty growing in their eyes. Monique exhaled quietly, letting the moment stretch. Every second a deliberate claim on the space she had built and now fully occupied. The young pilot lowered his phone slightly, though recording continued, capturing the quiet intensity, the weight of experience, the unspoken command that had changed the atmosphere completely. In that suspended tension, the hangar was hers, the narrative poised for the next move, and the staff, the onlookers, and the cameras all waited, knowing that the culmination of this quiet but undeniable authority was imminent, and that the subtle shift in power had already begun to reshape their perception of who truly held control. The manager took a tentative step back, his hand still lingering near the desk, as if he might reclaim the authority he had assumed, but Monique Harrison did not shift. She moved her gaze across the hangar, observing each technician, pilot, and assistant, noting their uncertain expressions, the slight hesitation in their posture, the way their eyes followed her every motion. She remembered similar moments in her career, in boardrooms and client meetings where confidence had been tested and underestimated, and how she had learned to let calm carry the weight of influence rather than force. The assistant's soft voice buzzed again through the earpiece, confirming that all systems were ready, security protocols verified, and permissions fully granted under her name. Monique adjusted her stance, shifting her weight slightly onto one foot, and the subtle movement caused the air in the hangar to respond, as though every surface, every reflective panel, recognized the authority she now radiated. Whispers among the staff rose, quiet at first, then slightly louder, as a few employees dared to glance at the screens confirming her credentials, the verification signals, the green lights on access panels that once seemed so controlled by the manager. The young pilot lowered his phone, but not before capturing a few seconds of the tension, his eyes widening as he realized the full measure of her presence, the quiet command that did not demand attention yet received it in full. Monique let her eyes meet the manager's one last time, a calm assessment that silently communicated both understanding and inevitability, the balance of power shifting incrementally with every heartbeat in the hangar. The manager's expression faltered, his confidence wavering as if he had suddenly realized the assumptions that had guided his behavior were no longer valid. The room held its collective breath as Monique took a small step forward, allowing her reflection to stretch across the polished fuselage of the nearest jet, each line and curve mirroring the precision and poise she carried. Conversations stilled entirely, the hum of the ventilation and distant machinery becoming a subtle underscore to the charged silence that now defined the space. Monique's presence alone had become a declaration, a quiet assertion of ownership that needed no amplification, no raised voice, only measured movement and the certainty of history, of experience, of accomplishment. The assistants, pilots, and technicians all absorbed the shift, realizing that the narrative they had assumed, the roles they had prepared to enforce, were in the process of realignment, that the authority they had counted on had been quietly and irreversibly transferred. Monique exhaled softly, letting the moment linger, every second a testament to calm command, to control achieved without confrontation, to the inevitability of acknowledgment, and in that precise suspension of tension, the hangar, the people within it, and the very air itself seemed to recognize that a new order had taken hold, silent but undeniable, waiting only for the next move to complete the transformation. Monique Harrison's eyes scanned the hangar once more, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the quick glances at the verification screens, and the barely audible whispers of recognition spreading among the staff. Every detail registered, the way the pilots adjusted their jackets, the technicians straightening up from their stations, the assistants exchanging cautious nods. She recalled the countless hours building her aviation company, each negotiation, each approval, each obstacle overcome silently, and how that experience had forged her capacity for controlled authority. The manager tried to interject again, his tone sharper, but his words faltered as Monique's calm intensity held the space. She tilted her head slightly, a small gesture that conveyed full command without aggression, and the hangar seemed to acknowledge the unspoken shift. Her assistant's voice in the earpiece confirmed that all operational systems were aligned and ready, the subtle hum of notifications marking each confirmation. A few employees who had been hesitant now glanced at one another, the realization dawning that the person standing before them had the ultimate authority over the hangar and its assets. Monique took a measured step toward the row of aircraft, the polished fuselages reflecting her composed figure, the sunlight glinting off the metallic surfaces like a quiet spotlight. She breathed slowly, letting the rhythm of her presence resonate throughout the space. Each exhale a silent assertion of control, a reminder of the years spent building respect through diligence rather than volume. The manager shifted uncomfortably, sensing the balance of power slipping from his grasp, while the staff collectively absorbed the weight of this subtle transformation. The young pilot lowered his phone slightly, capturing the moment but understanding instinctively that nothing needed embellishment. The authority was clear in her poise, her gestures, and the silent communication that had taken hold. Monique allowed herself a brief pause, letting the anticipation stretch, every second a measured beat in a space suddenly charged with acknowledgment. The hum of machinery, the faint echo of footsteps, the distant vibrations of engines all seemed to bend toward the new order, the hangar alive with quiet recognition of her presence. Her gaze returned to the manager, steady, unflinching, conveying the inevitability of the next steps. Employees could no longer rely on assumption or hierarchy alone. Every decision and movement would now be measured against the reality of who truly held authority. The room's energy settled into a tense, expectant silence, each observer aware that the next moments would determine the acknowledgement of ownership, the alignment of respect, and the unfolding of consequences that Monique had quietly orchestrated from the beginning. Every action deliberate, every glance precise, the hangar fully attuned to the inevitability of recognition and the subtle, undeniable assertion of her control. The hangar seemed to hold its breath as Monique Harrison allowed a subtle shift in posture, a small step toward the control panels that blinked with confirmation lights. Every eye followed her, technicians and assistants alike, their previous confidence replaced by cautious observation, the weight of realization settling in. Monique's gaze lingered on the manager, whose attempts at control had grown quieter, his words thinner, unsure, while the employees absorbed the undeniable shift. Her hand hovered briefly over the console, signaling to her assistant, and instantly the screens updated, verifying permissions, logging entries, and confirming operational authority without a single raised voice. The room reacted in the quietest ways. A technician exhaled slowly, an assistant straightened a sleeve, a pilot adjusted a headset, as if aligning with a new order. Monique paused, letting the tension extend, letting the subtle power she wielded speak louder than any command could. She remembered moments of underestimation in her career, the quiet dismissals in offices and on runways, and how each one had taught her the value of controlled authority, of letting patience and precision carry the weight of influence. The manager attempted another interjection, a polite but trembling query about procedure, but Monique's steady, measured gaze silenced the interruption, her calm more commanding than any shouted instruction. Phones and cameras, previously lifted hesitantly, lowered slightly, yet recorded every nuance of posture, every flicker of expression, every unspoken assertion. Monique's assistant whispered softly, confirming the completion of verification protocols, and Monique allowed a subtle nod, just enough to communicate approval without drawing overt attention. The light in the hangar reflected off the jet's polished fuselages, creating a mosaic of reflection that mirrored the composed figure of Monique standing firmly yet gracefully, a testament to experience and authority. Whispers subsided, conversations stilled, and the low hum of machinery became a background to the silent acknowledgement of her control. The staff understood in increments that assumptions of power were shifting, that authority had a new locus, that every motion and decision would now be measured against reality rather than perceived hierarchy. Monique's presence filled the space entirely, not with force, but with undeniable command, the kind that required no demonstration beyond the precision of her movements and the assurance in her eyes. The hangar, once a stage for routine operation, had become a theater of quiet recognition, each observer aware that the moment they had witnessed marked a transition, a shift in alignment that would set the tone for every action and reaction from this point onward, all under the silent but absolute influence of Monique Harrison. The atmosphere in the hangar tightened as Monique Harrison took another deliberate step forward, her presence commanding the attention of everyone within the large space. Technicians paused mid-task, their tools hovering in the air as if waiting for a signal, and the pilots shifted, their eyes flicking nervously toward the control panels that now reflected active authorizations under Monique's credentials. The manager attempted to interject again, clearing his throat with an effort at authority that now sounded fragile. "Ma'am, we cannot proceed without proper clearance verification." But Monique's calm gaze met his directly, and in that instant, the manager's words seemed to dissipate, powerless against the quiet assurance she radiated. Her assistant's voice came through the earpiece, confirming that all systems were synchronized, access fully granted, and operational protocols aligned with her directives, and Monique nodded subtly, signaling acknowledgment without haste. The hum of lights, the faint vibration from machinery, and the soft echoes from the hangar's steel walls seemed to synchronize with the unspoken command she now held over the environment. Employees, previously confident in their assumed authority, now looked to one another with uncertainty, recognizing the shift in power, and a few exchanged small, almost imperceptible nods of acknowledgment toward Monique. She walked slowly past the rows of jets, each polished fuselage reflecting her composed figure, sunlight glinting off the metal in a manner that seemed to accentuate her measured control. The staff could feel the tension in the air, the quiet assertion of dominance not through confrontation, but through presence, expertise, and the silent weight of a career built over years of precision and accomplishment. Monique paused near a large turboprop, letting her gaze sweep the hangar, registering every subtle movement, every slight adjustment in posture, every flicker of apprehension, and she allowed a brief exhale, a small, measured breath that carried through the space like a pulse, steady and unwavering. Phones lowered slowly, cameras recorded, and yet the quiet intensity of the moment was sufficient to communicate authority without additional embellishment. The manager shifted his weight, his confidence visibly diminishing, and Monique's eyes held him in place with a calm scrutiny that required no words, only the certainty of ownership and control. The hangar's energy seemed to bend subtly toward her, a silent acknowledgment from every individual present that the assumptions they had relied upon were no longer sufficient. Technicians resumed their work with tentative care, pilots adjusted equipment with awareness, and the assistants observed Monique's movements closely, understanding that each step, each glance, each subtle gesture carried consequence. Monique's presence alone reshaped the space, converting the hangar from a setting of presumed control to a theater of deliberate recognition, every individual sensing the unspoken reality that authority had quietly and irrevocably shifted, setting the stage for the next moment when her influence would be fully revealed. Monique Harrison paused near the center of the hangar, letting her gaze sweep over the rows of aircraft, each reflecting her composed figure and the light streaming through the large windows. The staff, technicians, and pilots all moved with measured hesitation, aware that the subtle authority she carried was no longer a suggestion but a reality they could not ignore. She took a slow, deliberate breath, remembering her early days in aviation, the countless moments of being underestimated, the quiet dismissals from boardrooms to small airstrips, and how each experience had built the foundation for her steady command. Her assistant's voice buzzed softly through the earpiece, confirming final system checks, and Monique allowed herself a minimal nod, acknowledging readiness without disrupting the charged stillness. The manager shifted uneasily, sensing that every assumption he had relied upon was eroding, while the staff exchanged glances, some lowering tools, others straightening in their stations, the realization dawning that the authority in the room had realigned. Monique's eyes moved deliberately across the hangar, noting subtle shifts in posture, hesitant glances toward access panels, and the cautious movements of those who had once assumed control. Her calm presence seemed to fill the space, each measured movement and controlled gesture signaling ownership without a single raised voice, and the quiet hum of machinery became the backdrop to a room held in suspended anticipation. She recalled moments when her patience had been tested, when her quiet demeanor had been misread as weakness, and she allowed that memory to fortify the control she now exhibited. Phones and cameras recorded silently, capturing the gravity of the scene, while Monique stood still, every inch of her posture asserting the reality of her authority. The manager's attempts at speech faded under the weight of her composed scrutiny, and the staff gradually accepted the new order, understanding that every decision, every movement, every glance would now be measured against the truth of her presence. Monique shifted slightly toward the control panels, her reflection mirrored across the polished fuselages of the jets, sunlight accentuating the precision and poise she carried. The assistants and technicians adjusted their positions, their subtle nods confirming recognition of her direction, while pilots observed with careful attention. The hangar itself seemed to respond to the rhythm she set, every footstep, every measured pause, every quiet gesture reinforcing the realignment of authority, and in that suspended moment, The space held its collective breath, poised for the next movement that would fully reveal the consequences of her silent command. The anticipation was tangible, every observer aware that the quiet tension would soon give way to definitive action, and that the controlled authority Monique exuded was poised to reshape the hangar's operations in a way that none present could ignore. Monique Harrison reached into her handbag and retrieved a sleek tablet, its surface reflecting the overhead lights, and she held it confidently in front of her, showing the full verification of her ownership and operational authority. The screens around the hangar flickered in confirmation, each light a subtle signal of alignment with her directives, and the staff could not help but notice the change. The manager attempted to speak again, his voice faltering as he asked questions about procedures and protocol, but Monique's steady gaze met his, and in that moment, all uncertainty seemed to dissipate. Technicians and pilots paused, their hands still on tools and controls, watching her every movement, aware that each decision now rested in her hands. Monique's assistant spoke softly through the earpiece, confirming system readiness and synchronization across all operational platforms, and Monique nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture that carried weight far greater than any verbal command could. The staff began to adjust their positions, subtle shifts in posture that communicated acknowledgment of her authority, and even the manager could not ignore the quiet, undeniable presence she exuded. Monique's eyes scanned the hangar, noting every reflection in the polished fuselages, the careful arrangement of equipment, the attentive faces of her employees, and she allowed a controlled exhale, letting the tension in the room stretch and settle. The young pilot lowered his phone slightly, still recording, and glanced at Monique with a mix of admiration and realization, recognizing the precision and calm that had brought the situation under complete control. Whispers among staff became quieter, some tentative acknowledgement of her directives passing in exchanged glances, and the atmosphere shifted from one of assumed control to measured respect. Monique took a deliberate step toward the row of jets, her movements composed, deliberate, each action reinforcing the reality that she was in command, that ownership was tangible, and authority was no longer questioned. The manager's posture stiffened, uncertainty creeping into his expression, and the staff collectively understood that the balance of power had shifted. Monique allowed a moment to linger, the silence heavy with anticipation, each breath measured, each glance purposeful, as though the hangar itself recognized the shift in command. The hum of machinery, the subtle vibrations of engines, the reflective surfaces of the jets all accentuated her presence, creating a space that acknowledged her calm control without a word raised. Monique's gaze returned to the manager, unwavering, her calm precision underscoring the reality that every move, every instruction, every decision would now be aligned with her authority. The staff's attention remained fixed, each person aware that the next sequence of actions would solidify her command fully, the quiet power she projected shaping the operations of the hangar in real time. Monique's presence alone established a rhythm, a silent command, and the room collectively felt the shift, the recognition of her role complete, poised for the next step in asserting control that would redefine the space entirely. Monique Harrison straightened in the center of the hangar, her hand hovering briefly over the tablet, and with a quiet command through her earpiece, the verification systems activated fully, confirming ownership across every access point, every operational panel, and every security terminal. The screens lit up in sequence, green signals pulsing with precision, as if the hangar itself had acknowledged the legitimacy of her authority. The manager stepped back, his expression taut with unease, while the technicians and pilots collectively registered the shift, their whispers fading into tense silence. Monique allowed a small, deliberate pause, letting the weight of years of experience and preparation settle into the room like a slow tide, each second building anticipation without a single word raised. The reflective surfaces of the jets captured the subtle light, creating a mosaic of her presence and the confirmation lights, each panel amplifying the quiet assertion of control she radiated. Employees adjusted their postures, hesitant but aware that the space had been redefined, and even the manager could not ignore the factual alignment displayed on the monitors. Monique's eyes swept the hangar again, noting every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language, every glance toward the consoles, and in each she recognized the acknowledgment of authority she had quietly claimed. The young pilot lowered his phone slightly, but continued recording, understanding that the moment captured was not simply procedural, but a demonstration of composed command, of influence exercised without theatrics. Monique exhaled softly, letting the rhythm of her presence resonate through the hangar, a silent pulse that underscored her full control. She recalled the numerous times she had been underestimated, dismissed for quiet confidence, for subtle gestures, for measured tone, and how each experience had refined her ability to command without confrontation. The assistant's calm voice confirmed final synchronization, and Monique's slight nod sufficed to communicate readiness. The manager shifted again, trying to maintain composure, but the collective awareness of the staff rendered his authority secondary, the space now governed by verification, experience, and presence. Conversations had ceased entirely, leaving only the low hum of machines and the reflective glint of sunlight on fuselages, all amplifying the sense of undeniable command. Monique allowed her eyes to meet each staff member briefly, a fleeting acknowledgment that spoke louder than instruction, reinforcing both expectation and recognition. The hangar had transformed from a setting of assumed hierarchy to a space of measured compliance, silent acknowledgement, and controlled authority, every individual present understanding that operations would now proceed under the clear and deliberate direction of Monique Harrison. In that charged, quiet moment, the room waited, aware that her influence had reshaped the environment, and that the next actions would confirm the permanence of the shift, the subtle yet complete assertion of her power realized fully and without need for any further demonstration. Monique Harrison took a deliberate step back from the console, allowing the room to absorb the full weight of her verified authority, her eyes sweeping across the hangar to ensure every individual registered the shift in control. The technicians and pilots adjusted their stances subtly, acknowledging her presence and the unspoken command she now exerted. Their previous assumptions of power dissolved under the clarity of confirmation screens and synchronized systems. The manager shifted uneasily, his lips parting as if to speak, yet he found himself searching for words that could compete with the calm precision she radiated. Monique tilted her head slightly, a subtle gesture that conveyed both scrutiny and patience, signaling the staff to proceed with operational checks without verbal instruction. Each exhale she allowed seemed to ripple through the hangar, a measured pulse of authority that harmonized with the quiet hum of machinery and the reflective surfaces of the jets, creating a space that recognized her command without the need for demonstration. Her assistant's voice, soft and precise through the earpiece, confirmed that all protocols were executing correctly, each operational system reporting green, each access panel verified, each authorization complete. The employees, now fully aware of the transition, began to carry out their tasks with careful attention, their movements synchronized with her silent directive, every glance toward the control consoles reaffirming the shift. Monique's gaze lingered on the manager, unwavering, a calm intensity that required no confrontation, yet made it clear that authority had irrevocably shifted. The pilots checked instruments, technicians reviewed maintenance logs, assistants coordinated silently, and the manager's attempts at asserting prior control fell flat against the undeniable reality of her presence. Phones and recording devices captured the moment, yet even the cameras seemed secondary to the quiet yet profound assertion of command Monique embodied. She allowed a slow, intentional pause, letting the collective realization of the staff crystallize that the hierarchy they had relied upon no longer applied. Every detail, the angle of a hand, the shift of weight, the subtle exhalation, conveyed her influence, every measured movement reinforcing her dominance through clarity, precision, and the weight of experience. The hangar itself, with its rows of polished jets, the echo of distant operations, the faint hum of ventilation, seemed to align with her rhythm, the atmosphere acknowledging the order she now maintained. Monique took a small, controlled step forward, scanning the space one last time, her calm authority leaving no ambiguity, her presence transforming the hangar into a space where decisions, movement, and recognition were now anchored by her verified control, poised for the decisive actions that would fully solidify her influence and ensure that every element of the operation operated under the reality of her command. Monique Harrison raised her hand slightly, a precise motion that triggered the final sequence of commands across the hangar, the lights on the control panels blinking in perfect synchrony as every operational system responded instantly to her verified authority. The manager's eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came, and the staff around him began to move with deliberate attention, acknowledging that the decisions now lay in Monique's hands. Technicians checked instruments, adjusted gauges, and consulted manuals with renewed focus, each action performed under the implicit understanding of her control. The pilots, previously confident in their own assumptions, now aligned their checks and sequences with the silent rhythm Monique established, each step reinforcing the clarity of her command. She allowed herself a controlled breath, the subtle exhalation carrying a quiet power that resonated across the polished fuselages, reflecting light and authority simultaneously. Her assistant's voice confirmed in measured tones that all operational protocols were executed and logged correctly, permissions verified, and the hangar fully secured under her directives. Monique's eyes swept the room one last time, noting micro-expressions of recognition, hesitation, and adjustment, each reaction a confirmation that her presence now anchored the entire operation. The manager attempted a hesitant comment, a faint echo of authority he believed he retained, but Monique's calm, unwavering gaze and the synchronized responses of her staff rendered it insignificant, and the shift in power was undeniable. Phones recorded silently, capturing each subtle movement, each deliberate pause, each reflective glance that communicated authority without need for additional words. The assistants, technicians, and pilots all responded to the silent cues she provided, their coordinated compliance reinforcing the structural shift she had orchestrated. The hangar itself seemed to respond, every hum of machinery, every echoing footstep, every metallic reflection aligning with the precise, deliberate presence Monique maintained. She took another measured step, allowing the staff and manager to witness her control fully, each motion deliberate, each gesture communicating clarity, confidence, and undeniable ownership. The quiet authority she projected transformed the space, converting previous assumptions into a framework of acknowledgment and respect, leaving no ambiguity as to the locus of decision-making. Employees adjusted positions, checked instruments, and exchanged knowing glances, realizing that operational alignment now rested on her directive alone. Monique exhaled slowly, allowing the moment to stretch, each second emphasizing the completion of a transition from tentative control to verified command. The hangar, the personnel within it, and even the subtle sounds of engines and ventilation now seemed to harmonize with her rhythm, recognizing her authority as absolute, poised, and fully established, the stage set for the final consolidation of her influence across every operation within her space. Monique Harrison stepped forward into the center of the hangar, her posture straight, eyes scanning every reflection, every panel, and every person present, letting the realization of her verified authority settle fully into the space. The staff, pilots, and technicians all moved with deliberate care, their previous assumptions replaced with measured recognition of her presence, and the manager stood frozen, aware that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Monique allowed a small, controlled exhale, the subtle motion sending a quiet signal through the hangar, affirming that each operational decision now rested on her discretion alone. Her assistant's voice confirmed one final time that all systems were synchronized, permissions verified, and access granted completely under her directive, and she responded with the faintest nod, signaling finality without any overt gesture. The reflective surfaces of the jets mirrored her figure and the soft light, creating a scene where calm authority and precision dominated every perception. Employees adjusted, tools and instruments placed with meticulous attention, eyes lifting to acknowledge the reality of her control, and even the manager's tentative gestures were subdued under the weight of the undeniable alignment around her. Monique moved with intention along the row of aircraft, each step measured, silent, yet carrying the gravity of ownership, the unspoken message of experience and meticulous preparation. Whispers among the staff faded, replaced with quiet observance, each individual understanding that the framework of operations had been redefined, that responsibility and authority now traced to her verified presence. The young pilot held his phone, capturing the scene, yet lowering it slightly, recognizing that the true authority needed no embellishment, that every subtle shift, every controlled movement, every calculated pause communicated command more effectively than any spoken word. Monique allowed a moment of stillness to expand, the room held in suspended acknowledgment, machinery humming gently in the background, shadows cast by the sunlight reinforcing the spatial clarity she had established. She scanned the hangar one last time, eyes meeting each staff member briefly, communicating reassurance, recognition, and expectation in a single, silent gesture. The manager exhaled slowly, the realization evident in his expression that prior assumptions of control no longer applied. Monique's presence transformed the hangar, converting it into a space of quiet compliance and respectful acknowledgment. Every movement of the staff, every glance, every subtle shift now aligned with her authority. She let her gaze linger on the rows of jets, the polished metal reflecting the culmination of careful orchestration, the tangible result of years of preparation, and the understanding settled across the personnel that the command of operations, previously assumed by others, now rested solely with her. In that extended moment of composed dominance, the hangar, the staff, and the machinery all acknowledged the permanence of her influence, poised for the execution of the next steps under the clear and deliberate guidance of Monique Harrison, leaving no room for doubt, hesitation, or error.